The last thing Adrian Vale heard in his first life was the crack of old timber. Then came silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind that swallowed screams. The ceiling of the family's flagship furniture factory collapsed in the middle of an inspection. Dust filled his lungs. Steel beams twisted like paper. Somewhere nearby, someone shouted his name. Then darkness claimed everything. Adrian opened his eyes with a violent gasp. His suit was gone. Instead, he was wearing the navy blazer he hadn't owned in 12 years. The smell of polished oak drifted through the room. He knew this office. His grandfather's study. The massive grandfather clock still ticked beside the fireplace. The leather chair. The carved walnut desk. The old portrait of Elias Vale, the founder of Vale Heritage Furniture. Adrian's heart pounded. No. He stumbled toward the calendar hanging beside the bookshelf. September 14th. 12 years earlier. His knees almost gave out. I came back. His breathing became uneven. Not a dream. Not a hallucination. He remembered everything. Every betrayal. Every signature. Every funeral. Every lie. Most painfully, the day he accepted the family business. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Adrian, a maid called gently. Your grandfather asked everyone to gather in the conference hall. His chest tightened. Today. It was happening today. The inheritance announcement. The day his entire future had been decided. The first time around, he had accepted without hesitation. His grandfather had named him successor because Adrian understood craftsmanship better than anyone in the family. His uncle Victor smiled. His cousin Damien applauded. His aunt cried tears of joy. Back then, Adrian believed they supported him. Within 3 years, they had stolen suppliers. Within 5, they forged company accounts. Within 7, they blamed every debt on him. Within 10, they abandoned him before the factory collapsed under years of hidden corruption. He hadn't inherited a business. He had inherited a trap. Adrian stared at his own reflection in the window. 26 years old again. Healthy. Hopeful looking. But behind those younger eyes lived a man who had buried everyone he loved. This time, he whispered to himself, I won't carry your sins. The conference hall buzzed with quiet conversation. Executives lined one side. Family members gathered near the front. Elias Vale sat at the head of the table. Though already 80, the old man's posture remained straight. His eyes settled on Adrian with warmth. You're late. I'm sorry, grandfather. Sit. Adrian obeyed. Across the table, Damien leaned back confidently. Only 24 now. Still charming. Still smiling. Still dangerous. You look nervous, Damien joked. Adrian smiled politely. You'll understand why soon enough. Damien laughed. He thought it was harmless. Adrian knew otherwise. The family lawyer unfolded several documents. Elias stood. I've spent 60 years building Vale Heritage. Silence filled the room. I'm old. A few relatives protested immediately. He raised one hand. Enough. His voice carried authority that even Victor respected. I've decided who will lead after me. Every eye turned toward Adrian. Just like before. Only this time. Adrian already knew every word coming next. My grandson Adrian has earned my trust. Murmurs spread. He understands the craft. He respects our workers. Therefore, beginning next month, ownership and executive authority will gradually transfer to him. Applause erupted. Exactly as it had 12 years ago. Adrian slowly stood. Everyone expected gratitude. Acceptance. Promises. Instead, he bowed respectfully. Grandfather, I can't accept. The room froze. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Victor blinked. What? Damien actually laughed. Nice joke. Adrian remained calm. It isn't. The lawyer lowered his papers. Elias frowned. Explain. Adrian chose every word carefully. I love our family's history. I respect what you've built. But I won't become president. Complete silence. His aunt looked horrified. Victor narrowed his eyes. Are you refusing responsibility? I'm refusing ownership. Damien whispered, almost amused. Has he lost his mind? Adrian ignored him. I want no shares. No executive authority. No inheritance connected to the company. Several executives exchanged confused looks. One quietly dropped his pen. Elias stared without speaking. For the first time in Adrian's memories. His grandfather looked genuinely shocked. You've dreamed about this since childhood. I know. And now you refuse? Yes. Why? Because if I accept, I'll die carrying crimes I never committed. But Adrian couldn't say that. Instead, he answered softly. Because sometimes the greatest respect we can show something is knowing we're the wrong person to protect it. Victor immediately stood. This is unbelievable. He turned toward Elias. Father, if Adrian refuses, Damien can. No. Elias's voice cut through the room. No one speaks until Adrian finishes. The old man's eyes never left his grandson. You've never been impulsive. No. So someone convinced you? No. Then tell me the truth. Adrian swallowed. I've learned that wanting something isn't enough. You must also know its cost. And I'm not willing to pay this once. Elias said nothing. Neither did anyone else. For nearly an entire minute. Finally, the old man folded the inheritance papers. I'll postpone today's decision. Victor looked furious. But father, I said postponed. Meeting over. No explanation. No successor. No celebration. Everyone filed out with whispered confusion. Only Damien lingered. As Adrian walked past him, Damien grinned. You just handed away the biggest opportunity of your life. Adrian met his eyes. No. He smiled for the first time since waking. I handed away the biggest mistake. Damien watched him leave. For reasons he couldn't explain, that smile made him uncomfortable. Outside the mansion, rain had begun falling. Adrian stood beneath the old stone archway. In his previous life, this had been the happiest day he'd ever known. Today, it felt like freedom. But freedom came with uncertainty. If he wasn't leading Vale Heritage, who would? And would changing one decision be enough to escape the future? Or had he only begun rewriting it? 3 days passed without another word about the inheritance. The silence unsettled everyone except Adrian. His relatives expected him to change his mind. He never did. Instead, he packed a single suitcase and left the family estate before sunrise. No farewell. No announcement. Only a short handwritten note for his grandfather. Thank you for believing in me. I need to become someone worthy of that belief in my own way. By noon, Victor was furious. He ran away. Damien shrugged. He'll come crawling back. Neither of them knew Adrian had already rented a tiny apartment above an old woodworking supply shop on the east side of Greybridge. The room was barely large enough for a bed and a desk. Compared to the mansion, it felt empty. Compared to prison, it felt enormous. For the first time in years, his first life, or second, he owned nothing that someone else wanted. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building reminded him of the collapsing factory. Every loud truck outside made him sit upright. The memories refused to stay buried. He walked downstairs just before dawn. The shop owner, an elderly woman named Nora Ellison, was arranging hand tools behind the counter. She looked up. Couldn't sleep? Adrian smiled weakly. Does it show? You've got the eyes of someone who keeps arguing with yesterday. The words struck deeper than she intended. He nodded. I suppose I do. She handed him a steaming mug of coffee without asking for payment. My husband used to say Wood remembers every cut. She tapped the worn countertop. So do people. Adrian wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Maybe that was why his memories hurt so much. Because they had carved themselves too deeply to disappear. Instead of joining another furniture company, Adrian visited a neglected warehouse district. In his previous life, this neighborhood had transformed into the city's largest artisan market 6 years later. Today, most buildings stood abandoned. No one else saw opportunity. He did. An old warehouse with cracked windows caught his attention. Its roof leaked. Its paint peeled. Its foundation remained solid. Perfect. The owner nearly laughed when Adrian offered to lease it. You actually want this place? I do. You haven't even asked for a discount. I know what it's worth. The man stared at him strangely. If you say so. By sunset, Adrian possessed exactly one empty warehouse. And barely enough savings to survive 3 months. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt alive. Meanwhile, inside Vale Manor, Victor slammed financial reports across the dining table. This is ridiculous. Elias remained calm. What is? Without announcing a successor, investors are asking questions. They can wait. They won't. Damien leaned back in his chair. I'll handle them. Victor smiled proudly. You see? At least my son understands business. Elias looked toward Damien. What would you tell them? Damien answered immediately. That stability matters more than tradition. The old man's expression revealed nothing. Yet something about the answer disappointed him. Several days later, Adrian visited one of the oldest craftsmen in Greybridge. Master Lionel Graves. 72. Retired. Stubborn. In Adrian's first life, Lionel had died alone before anyone recognized the value of his handcrafted joinery techniques. His notebooks had been thrown away, an entire lifetime of knowledge lost. Adrian knocked gently. An irritated voice answered. "We're closed. You've been retired for 3 years." Silence. Then the door opened. An old man frowned at him. "Who are you?" "My name is Adrian. I don't remember ordering visitors." "You didn't? Then leave." Adrian smiled. "I came because no one else appreciates your work." Lionel's eyes narrowed. "Flattery? No. You once developed a hidden dovetail joint that could survive decades without visible nails." The old craftsman's expression froze. "I never published that." "I know. Who told you?" Adrian hesitated. "I heard stories." Lionel continued staring. Very few people had ever seen that design. Even fewer remembered it. Finally, the old man stepped aside. "You'd better come in." Over the following weeks, Adrian returned almost every day. He never mentioned the future. He simply listened, learned, practiced. Lionel criticized everything. "No. Too slow. Wrong angle. You rushed the finish." Each correction made Adrian better. Not because he lacked experience. Because in his previous life, he had managed companies. Now he was relearning the joy of creating something with his own hands. One afternoon, Lionel unexpectedly asked, "Why aren't you working for your family's company?" Adrian sanded a walnut panel before answering. "I chose not to. Most people chase power. I've already seen where that road leads." Lionel chuckled. "You talk like an old man. Sometimes I feel like one." Elsewhere, Damien entered the executive offices of Vale Heritage carrying a confident smile. Without Adrian present, people naturally looked toward the next heir. He enjoyed every second of it, especially when Victor quietly unlocked a filing cabinet. Inside rested several sealed accounting books. Damien glanced at them. "What are those?" Victor closed the drawer immediately. "Nothing you need to worry about." "What if grandfather asks?" "He won't." Damien frowned. For just a moment. His father looked nervous. Very nervous. It was the first crack in the perfect image Adrian had once believed. A crack that had existed long before the factory collapsed. Long before anyone realized the business was already rotting from within. And somewhere across the city, without knowing it, Adrian had just stepped off the path that once led to his death. But another path, one no one had walked before, had only begun. Autumn settled over Greybridge with crisp mornings and the smell of damp cedar. Every sunrise found Adrian unlocking the warehouse before anyone else arrived. The building no longer looked abandoned. Fresh windows reflected the pale morning light. The leaking roof had been repaired. Workbenches stood in neat rows. Second-hand tools hung carefully along the walls. It wasn't a factory. Not yet. It was a workshop. His workshop. Every nail he drove into the walls reminded him that this place belonged to no board of directors, no greedy relatives, and no inheritance contract. Only to him. Lionel arrived carrying 2 rough maple boards. Without greeting, he tossed them onto the bench. "Build me 2 identical chairs." Adrian nodded. "When do you need them?" Lionel smirked. "Yesterday." For 6 hours Adrian measured, cut, and assembled without stopping. When he finished, Lionel walked around both chairs in silence. He pressed each joint, ran a finger across every edge, then suddenly sat down. The chair didn't move, didn't creak, didn't wobble. Lionel finally looked up. "You've improved." Adrian smiled. "I had a good teacher. Don't ruin the moment." They both laughed. It was the first genuine laugh Adrian had shared with anyone since waking in his second life. For a brief moment, the weight of his memories felt lighter. Then his phone rang. The caller ID made his smile disappear. "Grandfather." He hesitated before answering. "Grandfather, come have dinner tonight." Adrian looked at the half-finished workshop around him. "I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not asking as chairman." A pause. "I'm asking as your grandfather." Adrian quietly agreed. Vale Manor hadn't changed. The marble floors, the antique staircase, the scent of polished oak. Walking through the front doors felt like stepping into a memory that refused to fade. The servants greeted him warmly. Unlike the first life, there was no celebration waiting. No executives. Only Elias sitting alone in the library. A chessboard rested between 2 armchairs. "You still remember how to play?" Adrian smiled faintly. "I hope so." They played without speaking for several minutes. Elias made the first mistake. Something Adrian had never seen before. "You let me take your bishop." "I know." You never make careless moves. I've become old. You've always been old. The old man chuckled. Fair enough. He studied Adrian across the board. You seem happier. I am. You own almost nothing. I've never felt richer. Elias nodded slowly. I had someone investigate. Adrian looked up. I know. You rented a warehouse. Yes. You've been working under Lionel Graves. Yes. You didn't ask me for money. No. Why? Adrian looked down at the chessboard. Because if I build something this time, I want to know every brick belongs to my own choices. The old man stared quietly. Finally, he pushed a small envelope across the table. I won't force you back. Adrian didn't touch it. What is it? A loan agreement. I don't want charity. It isn't charity. You'll repay every cent. I still can't. Open it. Inside was a simple contract. 0 interest. 10-year repayment. No collateral. Only one handwritten sentence at the bottom. Build something that makes you proud. Adrian swallowed hard. His grandfather had signed it personally. No lawyers. No conditions. No ownership claims. For a moment, he almost accepted. Then another memory surfaced. His first life. Every favor had eventually become a weapon. He gently slid the envelope back. I can't. Elias didn't look offended. Only disappointed. I understand. No. Adrian said softly. I don't think you do. Across town, Victor wasn't enjoying the quiet. Investors kept asking the same question. Who would succeed Elias? Without a public answer, uncertainty spread. Orders slowed. Banks delayed negotiations. Suppliers became cautious. Victor blamed Adrian for everything. He abandoned us. One executive cleared his throat. Respectfully, Mr. Adrian hasn't worked here for months. Victor's face darkened. His refusal created this uncertainty. Another executive exchanged nervous glances. Nobody argued. But nobody agreed either. That evening, Damien visited the workshop unannounced. He stepped inside wearing an expensive suit completely unsuited for sawdust. So this is where the future chairman disappeared. Adrian didn't stop sanding a cabinet door. I'm busy. I noticed. Damien looked around. Honestly, I expected something larger. It's enough. For a hobby. Adrian finally looked at him. It's not a hobby. Damien laughed. You walked away from a company worth hundreds of millions. To build tables? Chairs. What? I also build chairs. Damien rolled his eyes. You've always had strange priorities. Adrian wiped the dust from his hands. What do you want? Damien's smile became more serious. Come back. That surprised Adrian. You need me? No. But grandfather does. You care about what grandfather needs? For once, yes. Adrian studied him carefully. In his first life, Damien never bothered asking. He simply waited until Adrian accepted responsibility. Then he slowly undermined him from within. This conversation had never happened before. The future was already changing. I'm not coming back. Damien sighed. Then don't complain later. I'm not the one who will. Something flickered across Damien's face. Annoyance? Confusion? Perhaps both. Without another word, he left. But as his car disappeared down the street, Adrian noticed someone else watching from across the road. A woman carrying a camera. The moment she realized she'd been seen, she lowered it and walked away. She hadn't been photographing the workshop. She had been photographing Damien. Adrian frowned. He didn't recognize her. Yet something about her presence felt important. The next morning, Lionel tossed Adrian another impossible assignment. Restore this. It was an antique writing desk split almost completely in half. The owner says it belonged to her grandmother. Adrian examined the damage. Most craftsmen would replace entire sections. Lionel folded his arms. If you replace too much, it stops being the same desk. Adrian nodded. I understand. As he worked, he realized something unexpected. People weren't paying him to build furniture. They were trusting him with memories. That thought stayed with him long after sunset. Perhaps this second life wasn't about escaping his past. Perhaps it was about preserving what truly mattered. 3 weeks later, Adrian completed the restoration. The elderly customer stood speechless. She gently ran her fingers across the repaired wood. I can't even see where it broke. Her voice trembled. My husband built this for our wedding. She hugged the desk as though embracing an old friend. Then she quietly hugged Adrian. Thank you. She left glowing reviews across local community groups. Within days, more customers arrived. Then more. Soon the once empty warehouse echoed with conversations instead of silence. Not about profits. About stories. This rocking chair belonged to my father. My daughter inherited this cabinet. My grandfather carved this himself. Each piece carried someone's life. Each restoration reminded Adrian why he had loved woodworking long before he had ever loved business. One rainy afternoon, Nora hurried into the workshop. "You've got visitors." Two people entered. One was a sharply dressed architect named Claire Bennett. The other, the woman with the camera. She introduced herself first. "Rachel Mercer. I'm an investigative journalist." Adrian stiffened. "I don't have anything worth investigating." Rachel smiled. Maybe not." Claire opened a portfolio. "Our firm is restoring the old Kingsbridge Theater." Adrian immediately remembered it. In his first life, the project had failed after investors cut corners. The original handcrafted interior had been replaced with cheap materials. The building lost its historic status. Eventually, it was demolished. Claire continued, "We're looking for someone capable of restoring 19th century woodwork." "You found the wrong shop." Rachel shook her head. "Actually, I think we found the right one." She placed several printed photographs on the workbench. Adrian froze. They were pictures of his recent restorations. She had been documenting his work for weeks. "I never published them." Rachel spoke calmly. "I wanted to understand who you were first. And now, I think you're someone who walked away from something valuable." Adrian almost laughed. "If only you knew." Claire pointed toward one photograph. "This repair. Most restoration companies said it couldn't be done. You proved them wrong." Adrian remained silent. Finally, he asked, "Why not hire someone famous?" Claire answered honestly, "Because famous companies gave us expensive shortcuts. We need someone who still cares." Those words struck him deeply. In his first life, he had slowly become the executive who approved shortcuts. Not because he wanted to, because every budget meeting forced impossible compromises. "Never again. I'll do it." Meanwhile, trouble quietly spread inside Vale Heritage. An anonymous email reached several board members. Attached were copies of suspicious supplier payments, duplicate invoices, missing inventory, strange transfers between shell companies. Victor immediately dismissed them. Fabricated. But one board member wasn't convinced. Margaret Lowe had served the company for 30 years. She requested a full audit. Victor refused. That refusal planted the first seed of suspicion. That evening, Damien confronted his father. "Are the documents real?" Victor didn't answer immediately. "You've been reading things that don't concern you. So they're real." Victor shut the office door. "Listen carefully. What your grandfather built can't survive without flexibility." Damien frowned. "That's not an answer." "It is." "No." Victor lowered his voice. "Sometimes numbers need adjusting." Damien stared. "You've been hiding losses." "I'm protecting this family." Damien looked genuinely shaken. "You always blamed Adrian." Victor's expression hardened. "He was chairman. He signed every report. But you prepared them." Victor didn't respond. Silence became its own confession. For the first time in his life, Damien wondered whether Adrian had ever truly been the villain. Across the city, Adrian received another unexpected visitor. Elias. No luxury car. No assistants. Just the old man carrying a wooden box. "I brought something." He placed it on the workbench. Inside lay an unfinished music box. Tiny gears rested beside carved walnut panels. "I started making this for your grandmother." He smiled sadly. "I never finished." Adrian carefully picked up one piece. "The carving's beautiful. My hands aren't steady anymore." The old man looked around the busy workshop. "I was wondering." He hesitated. "Would you finish it? Not as chairman. Not as heir. Simply as a grandson." Adrian felt his throat tighten. This request carried no hidden obligation. No contract. No inheritance. Only trust. He nodded. "I'd be honored." As Elias prepared to leave, he paused at the doorway. "You know, I used to believe businesses were the greatest things we could leave behind." He looked back at Adrian. "I think I was wrong." Then he walked into the fading evening. Adrian watched him go, unaware that someone else had been watching too. From a parked car across the street, Rachel lowered her camera once again. This time she wasn't photographing Adrian. She was photographing Elias. And in the passenger seat beside her lay a thick folder labeled Vale Heritage, Confidential. Inside were documents that could destroy one branch of the Vale family, or save the other. The unfinished music box stayed on Adrian's workbench for 3 days before he touched it. Not because he lacked the skill, because he understood what it meant. In his first life, His grandparents had rarely spoken about sentiment. Everything became numbers, margins, contracts, expansion plans. Now, holding the tiny walnut lid in his hands, Adrian realized something he had never understood before. His grandfather had once simply wanted to make a gift for the woman he loved. The business had stolen that chance. He wasn't going to let it happen again. Lionel watched from across the workshop. "You've been staring at that box for an hour. It's important. So, I'm afraid of ruining it." Lionel snorted. "Then you're thinking like an accountant." Adrian looked up. "A craftsman starts." Without another word, the old man walked away. Adrian smiled. The lesson was simple. Perfection never came before the first cut. He picked up his carving knife. Days passed in careful silence. Each gear was polished, each spring adjusted, each carved flower restored by hand. When Adrian finally wound the mechanism, a gentle melody filled the workshop. Everyone stopped working. Even Lionel quietly removed his glasses. "It still sings," the old man murmured. Adrian closed the lid. So do memories. Meanwhile, Rachel Mercer wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing truth. Boxes of financial records surrounded her apartment. Invoices, supplier contracts, corporate filings, bank statements. One pattern kept repeating. Small furniture suppliers disappeared shortly after signing exclusive contracts with Vale Heritage. The official explanation was always the same: business failure. Yet the dates bothered her. Every failed supplier had first borrowed money through the same finance company, a company secretly connected to Victor Vale. Rachel leaned back in her chair. "This isn't bad management," she whispered. "It's a machine." Someone had been bleeding small businesses dry for years. The next morning, she met Margaret Lowe in a quiet cafe. Margaret arrived carrying only a notebook. "I shouldn't be here." Rachel nodded. "I know." Margaret lowered her voice. "I reviewed internal purchasing records. And there are gaps." "How large?" "Large enough that someone powerful keeps deleting information." Rachel slid several copied invoices across the table. Margaret's face lost its color. "Where did you get these?" "I protect my sources." Margaret slowly closed the folder. "If these are authentic, someone inside the Vale family belongs in prison." Across town, Victor was beginning to lose patience. He slammed another newspaper onto Damien's desk. A small article featured a photograph of Adrian restoring antique furniture. The headline was modest: "Young craftsman revives historic pieces." Victor scoffed. "He's turning into a celebrity carpenter." Damien didn't answer. Victor continued. He could have been running an empire. Instead of agreeing, Damien quietly asked, "Did Adrian really cause the company's losses?" Victor looked at him sharply. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. I've already answered it." "No. You blamed him. You never explained." Victor stepped closer. "Watch your tone." Damien held his father's gaze. For the first time in his life, he didn't look away. That evening, Adrian received exciting news. Claire Bennett called with a broad smile. "The city approved our restoration proposal." "That's wonderful. Actually, we have a problem." Adrian's smile faded. "The budget committee wants cheaper materials." His stomach tightened. Just like last time, history was trying to repeat itself. Claire continued. "They'll vote tomorrow." In his first life, the committee had chosen cost over quality. The theater slowly deteriorated before finally being condemned. This time, Adrian knew exactly what would happen, but simply warning them wouldn't work. He needed proof. He spent the entire night designing a demonstration. Not a speech, not a report, a test. The following afternoon, committee members gathered inside the old theater. Some looked bored, others impatient. Adrian placed two identical wooden panels on a table. "They appear the same." He handed each member a small hammer. "Strike them." The first panel cracked almost immediately. The second barely showed a mark. "The cheaper material lasts 5 years." He tapped the stronger one. "This one lasts 50. Someone objected. "But it costs more." Adrian nodded. "It also prevents paying for the same repair 6 different times." Silence spread through the room. Then one elderly committee member smiled. "My grandfather used to say, cheap work is the most expensive work." The vote changed. By a narrow margin. The theater would be restored properly. Claire let out a breath she had been holding all day. "You just saved the project." Adrian quietly shook his head. "No, I saved its future." Only he knew how literal those words were. Late that night, as Adrian locked the workshop, he noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. "Victor," standing beside it. Alone. No driver. No assistance. No smile. Adrian stopped several feet away. I didn't expect you here. Victor folded his arms. I came to offer peace. Adrian almost laughed. Peace? You left. You've built your little business. I don't intend to interfere. There was something unusually calm about Victor's voice. Too calm. What do you want? Victor looked around the quiet street. I want you to sign one document. Adrian's instinct screamed. What document? A legal statement confirming you permanently surrendered all future claims to Vale Heritage. I already refused the inheritance. The lawyers prefer certainty. Adrian didn't move. In his first life, no such document had ever existed. This wasn't routine. It was fear. Someone desperately wanted him completely removed from the company's future. He smiled politely. I'll have my own lawyer review it. Victor's expression froze for half a second. Then the smile returned. Of course. He drove away. Adrian remained standing under the streetlights. The game had changed again, and Victor knew it. Adrian didn't sleep. The proposed legal document lingered in his thoughts. Not because he wanted the inheritance, because he wanted to understand why Victor suddenly needed him gone forever. By sunrise, he had reached only one conclusion. Victor wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting himself. The next afternoon, Rachel appeared at the workshop carrying a thick envelope. I need your opinion. I thought journalists didn't ask for business advice. I don't. She placed several photocopies across the workbench. I need someone who understands wood. Adrian examined the documents. Shipping manifests. Supplier certifications. Inspection reports. One certificate immediately caught his attention. It says these oak beams came from North Ridge timber. Rachel nodded. They didn't. How do you know? He pointed to the grain pattern shown in the inspection photographs. North Ridge oak grows slowly. This grain is too wide. Claire, who had stopped by to discuss the theater project, leaned closer. You can tell from a photograph. Adrian nodded. Someone substituted lower-grade timber. Rachel slowly smiled. So the fraud wasn't just financial. It was structural. The realization sent a chill through all three of them. Cheap materials. Fake certifications. Hidden payments. If the same pattern had reached the family factory, then the collapse in Adrian's first life had never been an accident. It had been built into the walls. Rachel carefully closed the folder. I've been investigating for months. I thought this was corporate corruption. She looked directly at Adrian. I think it's something worse. Adrian met her gaze. So do I. Neither of them said the word aloud. Manslaughter. Meanwhile, Elias called an emergency board meeting. Every executive attended, including Victor, including Damien. The old chairman looked older than usual, but his voice remained steady. I've decided to commission an independent audit. Victor immediately objected. We already completed one last year. I know. This one won't be conducted by our finance department. Silence. Margaret Lowe lowered her eyes to hide a faint smile. Victor spoke more sharply than intended. This could damage investor confidence. Elias answered calmly. If honesty damages confidence, then dishonesty will destroy it. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. The vote passed. 7-4. Victor lost. For the first time in years. That evening, Damien found his father alone in the executive office. Stacks of files covered the desk. You're moving documents. Victor didn't deny it. They'll never understand. The auditors. Damien looked at the open filing cabinet. You really are hiding something. Victor finally snapped. I saved this company. You buried debt. I protected jobs. You forged records. Victor slammed both hands onto the desk. I did what your grandfather never had the courage to do. Damien stared in disbelief. You call this courage? Victor said nothing. The silence answered for him. Across the city, Adrian delivered the completed music box to Vale Manor. Elias opened it carefully. The melody drifted through the quiet room. For several seconds, the old man couldn't speak. Then tears slowly filled his eyes. Your grandmother loved this song. Adrian smiled softly. I know. Elias looked up. You couldn't have known. Adrian's expression remained calm. Some things just feel right. The old man accepted the answer without pressing further. Before Adrian left, Elias handed him a worn leather notebook. It belonged to your great-grandfather. Inside were sketches, furniture designs, workshop notes, letters to apprentices, not financial records, not contracts, a lifetime devoted to craftsmanship. I think these belong with you. Adrian held the notebook carefully. It felt heavier than any inheritance. Not because of its weight, because of what it represented. A legacy no one could steal with forged paperwork. As Adrian stepped outside the manor gates, his phone vibrated. It was Rachel. Her voice was unusually tense. Where are you? Leaving my grandfather's house. Don't go back to the workshop. His heartbeat quickened. Why? I just got a call. Someone broke in. Adrian rushed to his truck. What was taken? Rachel hesitated. That's the strange part. They ignored the cash. They ignored the tools. What did they steal? The legal files. The lease. Your business records. And she took a slow breath. They searched your office like they were looking for something very specific. Adrian's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He had never kept company secrets. Never stored valuables. There was only one thing hidden in that office that almost no one knew existed. A locked drawer, containing the handwritten notes he'd begun making after his rebirth. Not about time travel, but about every suspicious supplier, executive, and event he remembered from his first life. Someone wasn't trying to rob him. Someone was trying to discover what Adrian already knew. The drive back to the workshop took 15 minutes. It felt like an hour. Adrian ran every red light he safely could, his mind racing faster than the truck. Who knew about the notebook? No one. At least, that was what he had believed. The notes were never a diary. They contained dates, names, factories, supplier changes, construction contracts, small details that had seemed meaningless in his first life, until the factory collapsed and every forgotten decision fit together like broken pieces of a puzzle. If those pages were gone, someone would know he wasn't guessing. Someone would know he had been predicting events. Rachel was waiting outside when Adrian arrived. Police officers stood near the entrance. Yellow tape stretched across the front door. Lionel leaned against the wall, his face dark with anger. The fools broke my chisels. Adrian hurried inside. Nothing had been smashed without reason. The filing cabinets stood open. Drawers had been emptied onto the floor. Shelves had been searched one by one. This wasn't vandalism. It was methodical. Rachel pointed toward Adrian's office. They wore gloves. No fingerprints. The cameras? Disabled. He entered slowly. The hidden drawer beneath his desk had been forced open. Empty. His notebook was gone. He closed his eyes. The room became eerily quiet. Not because the notebook proved anything. Because it proved someone feared it. A police detective approached him. I'm Detective Owen Harris. We'll investigate. Adrian nodded politely. I appreciate it. The detective looked around. They ignored equipment worth thousands. They knew exactly what they wanted. I think so. Do you have enemies? Adrian almost smiled. Too many. Instead, he answered. I honestly don't know. That wasn't entirely a lie. He knew who had betrayed him once. He didn't yet know who had ordered tonight's break-in. After the police left, Rachel stayed behind. You've been hiding something. Adrian looked at the damaged office. Everyone hides something. Not like this. She folded her arms. You weren't surprised they took documents. You were expecting it. He remained silent. Rachel sighed. I'm not asking because I'm curious. I'm asking because if we're chasing the same people, I need to know how dangerous they are. Adrian considered telling her everything. Impossible. Who would believe Rebirth? Instead, he chose the closest thing to the truth. I've spent years studying how certain business decisions destroy companies. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Years? He corrected himself. A long time. She didn't seem convinced. But she let it go. For what it's worth. I think they just made a mistake. How? They've confirmed you matter. Adrian slowly nodded. She was right. The burglary wasn't only theft. It was panic. Someone had acted before the audit even began. The following morning, the first auditor arrived at Vale Heritage. His name was Samuel Pierce, known across the country for exposing corporate fraud. Victor welcomed him with an immaculate smile. Mr. Pierce, we're happy to cooperate. Samuel smiled back. I certainly hope so. Within hours, accounting staff began whispering. Old files were being requested. Archived emails restored. Warehouse inventories compared against purchase records. The atmosphere changed overnight. People who had spent years walking confidently now avoided eye contact. Victor watched from his office window. For the first time in decades, he felt hunted. Damien noticed. He also noticed something else. His father had started making private phone calls every evening. Always outside. Always speaking quietly. Always ending the conversation the same way. Make sure nothing links back to me. Those words refused to leave Damien's mind. 2 days later, Adrian traveled with Claire to inspect the Kingsbridge Theater. Workers had carefully removed damaged wooden balconies. As Adrian examined one of the support beams, he suddenly froze. He recognized the supplier stamp. North Ridge Timber. Except, the grain was wrong. Exactly like the photographs Rachel had shown him. He carefully scraped away decades of dirt. Another stamp appeared underneath. A completely different supplier. His heartbeat quickened. They replaced the markings. Claire frowned. What does that mean? It means someone swapped quality timber for cheaper wood and hid it. When, years ago, Claire stared at the beam. If they did this here, they probably did it elsewhere. Adrian finished her sentence. Exactly. A cold realization settled between them. The corruption reached far beyond Vale heritage. Someone had built an entire network around counterfeit materials. That evening, Rachel burst into the workshop holding another folder. I found him. Found who? The owner of the finance company. She dropped the file onto the table. The company that had bankrupted dozens of suppliers had officially closed 8 years earlier. Its final director? A man named Leonard Cross. Adrian immediately recognized the name. Not from business meetings. From his own funeral. Leonard Cross had attended. He remembered seeing the man standing silently beside Victor after the factory collapse. At the time, Adrian thought he was merely another investor. He wasn't. He had been there from the beginning. Rachel noticed Adrian's expression. You know him? Adrian answered carefully. I've heard the name. I think Leonard disappeared. Disappeared? 3 years ago. No public records. No interviews. No tax filings. It's like he vanished. Adrian looked toward the dark workshop windows. No, he didn't vanish. He went into hiding. Rachel blinked. How can you be so sure? Adrian had no answer he could safely give. Instead, he quietly said, people like that never disappear by accident. Winter arrived early. Snow covered the streets of Greybridge, turning the city white. Inside Adrian's workshop, however, life continued. The restoration business had grown beyond anything he expected. 3 apprentices now worked under Lionel's supervision. Claire's theater project moved steadily forward. Customers came from neighboring cities. Yet Adrian refused to expand too quickly. In his first life, growth without foundations had destroyed everything. This time, patience was part of the plan. One snowy morning, Nora hurried inside carrying the newspaper. You should see this. The front page wasn't about Adrian. It wasn't about the workshop. It was about Vale heritage. Independent audit reveals major accounting irregularities. The article didn't mention names. Not yet. But investors reacted immediately. The company's stock plunged. Banks suspended new lending. News vans gathered outside the headquarters before noon. Lionel folded the newspaper. So, looks like your old family has problems. Adrian looked out the window. They've had problems for years. The difference is, people can finally see them. At Vale Heritage, chaos spread through every department. Employees whispered in hallways. Board members demanded explanations. Margaret requested emergency votes. Victor fought to delay every decision. But Samuel Pierce had already copied thousands of documents. The evidence was leaving the building, piece by piece. There was no stopping it now. That afternoon, Damien walked into his father's office without knocking. Tell me the truth. Victor didn't look up. I'm busy. Were the fake suppliers yours? Silence. Were the shell companies yours? Still silence. Damien's voice hardened. Answer me. Victor finally raised his eyes. You've become naive. No. I've become tired. Tired of what? Believing every lie you told. Victor slowly stood. You think honesty keeps businesses alive? I think lies kill them. The words struck harder than Damien expected, because he suddenly remembered Adrian saying something months earlier. You'll understand why soon enough. He understood now. Far too late. That evening, Damien drove to Adrian's workshop. He stood outside for several minutes before entering. The apprentices immediately recognized him. Their cheerful conversation stopped. Adrian looked up from a workbench. What brings you here? Damien didn't pretend anymore. I owe you an apology. The room became silent. Lionel quietly led the apprentices into the back room. Only the cousins remained. I thought you abandoned us. Damien said quietly. I thought you were selfish. I was wrong. Adrian listened without interrupting. My father. Damien struggled to finish the sentence. Used you. Adrian looked at him calmly. I know. You knew? I suspected. Damien laughed bitterly. I spent years defending him. And now, I don't know who he is anymore. Adrian placed his tools aside. Then find out. I'm trying. No. Adrian shook his head. You're deciding. Damien frowned. What do you mean? You already know what's right. The question is whether you'll choose it. The words lingered long after the conversation ended. Damien left without another argument. For the first time in either lifetime, they had spoken without hatred. Late that night, Rachel called Adrian. I think we're being watched again. Where are you? My apartment. He heard hurried footsteps in the background. And my files. They've been moved. Don't touch anything. I'm already outside. Adrian grabbed his coat. I'll be there. 20 minutes later, he arrived to find 2 police cars parked in front of Rachel's building. Her apartment door stood open. Nothing appeared stolen. Rachel looked shaken. They searched everything. What did they take? She slowly shook her head. Nothing. Adrian frowned. Nothing. She nodded. They copied my hard drive. How do you know? Because the security seal I placed inside the computer was broken. Someone hadn't come to steal evidence. They had come to learn what Rachel knew. Exactly as they had done with Adrian. 2 investigators. 2 break-ins. 1 invisible enemy. As Adrian looked around the apartment, something on the bookshelf caught his eye. A tiny wooden shaving. Fresh. Curled. Golden oak. It didn't belong there. He picked it up carefully. Rachel looked confused. What is it? Adrian stared at the shaving. His expression slowly hardened. I know this wood. You do? He nodded. It only comes from one private mill. Rachel's eyes widened. Can it lead us to whoever broke in? Adrian closed his fingers around the tiny piece of wood. It won't lead us. He said quietly. It will lead me back. Back to a place he had visited only once in his previous life. A forgotten lumber mill outside Greybridge. The same place where, years after the factory collapse, he had overheard 2 frightened workers whisper that someone had been replacing high-grade timber long before anyone noticed. This time, he wasn't going to arrive years too late. Snow still covered the roads when Adrian left Greybridge before dawn. The forgotten lumber mill lay nearly 60 miles away, hidden beyond abandoned railway tracks and dense pine forests. In his first life, he had stumbled across it by accident. By then it had already burned to the ground. Today, smoke still rose from its chimneys. He parked his truck half a mile away. Rachel climbed out of her car moments later. You weren't going to come alone, were you? I considered it. And I remembered that was usually a bad idea. She smiled. You're learning. They continued on foot. The mill looked ordinary. Old machinery. Stacks of timber. Workers loading trucks. Nothing illegal appeared at first glance. But Adrian wasn't looking for the obvious. He was looking for patterns. Just like before. Near the rear warehouse, he stopped. There. Rachel followed his gaze. 2 piles of oak beams stood side by side. They looked identical. They're not, Adrian whispered. How can you tell? The growth rings. The darker beams came from older forests. The lighter ones are cheaper. Rachel frowned. So, they're marked with the same supplier code. Understanding spread across her face. They're relabeling them. Adrian nodded. And charging premium prices. He quietly photographed everything. Truck numbers. Storage labels. Employee badges. Every detail mattered. A loud engine interrupted them. 3 black SUVs rolled through the gates. Adrian instantly recognized the man stepping from the lead vehicle. Leonard Cross. Older. More gray hair. The same cold eyes. Rachel quickly lifted her camera. Click. 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 Leonard paused. For one dangerous second. His eyes swept across the yard. Straight toward them. Move, Adrian whispered. They slipped behind stacked timber just before 2 security guards walked past. Rachel barely breathed. I think he saw us. I know. We need to leave. Not yet. Adrian pointed toward Leonard. He wasn't inspecting lumber. He was handing Victor Vale a thick envelope. Victor. Here. Not in the city. Not at headquarters. Here. Rachel's camera clicked once more. She captured the exchange. Then they quietly retreated into the trees. Only after reaching their vehicles did either of them speak. Rachel looked at the photographs. We finally have them together. Adrian nodded. But photographs won't convict them. No. They'll make people ask questions. Back in Greybridge, Samuel Pierce called an emergency meeting with the board. The audit had uncovered millions in unexplained transactions. Yet one thing still didn't make sense. The missing money hadn't remained inside Vale Heritage. It had flowed somewhere else. Margaret studied another spreadsheet. These shell companies all lead to dead ends. Samuel looked thoughtful. Unless. He stopped. Unless we're following the wrong company. Meanwhile, Damien entered his father's office. Victor was hurriedly shredding papers. You've started destroying evidence. Victor didn't deny it. Help me. Damien stood frozen. What? Take these. Burn them. For several seconds, neither moved. Victor's voice softened. I'm your father. I know. Then protect your family. Damien looked at the papers, then at the shredder, then back at Victor. Finally, he stepped backward. No. Victor's face hardened. You'll regret this. Damien quietly answered. I already regret too much. He walked out, leaving his father completely alone. That evening, Damien knocked on Adrian's workshop door again. This time he carried a cardboard archive box. I found these. Inside were old supplier contracts, warehouse inspections, meeting minutes. Nothing spectacular. Until Adrian reached the bottom. There lay a leather-bound appointment diary. Victor's. Damien spoke quietly. He forgot it in his office. Adrian opened the diary. Most entries looked ordinary. Lunches, meetings, travel. Then one repeated notation caught his eye. Elsie Mill. Again, and again, and again. For nearly 11 years. Rachel leaned closer. Elsie. Leonard Cross. Adrian nodded. The diary wasn't proof of fraud, but it was a map. One that connected Victor to the lumber mill long before anyone suspected corruption. Late that night, Adrian received an unexpected call. It was Elias. His voice sounded weaker than usual. Can you come tomorrow? Of course. I have something. A long pause. That should have been yours years ago. Adrian's heart sank. Something in his grandfather's tone felt final. The next morning, Adrian arrived at Vale Manor before sunrise. The mansion felt strangely quiet. Elias sat in the greenhouse, surrounded by winter roses. He looked thinner, older. The past few months had aged him more than the previous decade. You came. You asked. The old man smiled faintly. I've been reading the audit. Adrian remained silent. So many names. So many signatures. I trusted people I shouldn't have. You trusted family. I ignored warning signs. His eyes drifted toward the snow outside. I even blamed the wrong grandson. Those words hung heavily between them. For the first time, Elias was apologizing. Not as chairman, as a grandfather. I'm sorry. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. In his first life, he had waited years to hear those words. They never came. Now they meant something entirely different. Because he no longer needed them. I forgave you a long time ago. Elias looked surprised. You did. I just didn't know it. The old man reached beneath the table and lifted a small wooden chest. Unlike the music box, this one was locked. The key. Elias smiled. You already have it. Confused, Adrian examined the lock. Then he noticed the carving. A tiny hidden groove shaped exactly like one of the old workshop chisels his great-grandfather had designed. He removed the tool from his bag. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open. Inside rested dozens of handwritten journals. Workshop records. Letters. Original supplier agreements dating back 50 years. Elias spoke quietly. Your great-grandfather believed paperwork should tell the truth. He kept copies of everything. Adrian carefully opened one journal. His pulse quickened. The signatures. The supplier names. Some were identical to companies Rachel had traced. If the old records proved the original timber sources, they could expose every counterfeit substitution made afterward. This wasn't merely family history. It was evidence. At that exact moment, Rachel called. Her voice was urgent. Turn on the news. A television in the greenhouse showed breaking coverage. Police vehicles surrounded Vale Heritage headquarters. Search warrants. Financial investigators. Officers carrying sealed evidence boxes. Samuel Pierce stood outside speaking briefly to reporters. The audit had officially become a criminal investigation. Victor Vale was nowhere to be seen. Neither was Leonard Cross. Rachel spoke again. They've disappeared. Adrian wasn't surprised. They were always going to run. Hours later, detectives searched Victor's office. The shredder was still warm. But Damien had unknowingly saved the most important diary. Detective Harris carefully placed it into an evidence bag. This may be exactly what we needed. Margaret quietly looked out the office window. It's over. Samuel shook his head. No. Now it begins. That evening, Adrian, Rachel, Claire, Damien, Margaret, and Detective Harris gathered inside the workshop. Documents covered every table. The old journals, Victor's diary, photographs from the lumber mill, supplier contracts, inspection reports. For hours they connected names, dates, payments, hidden companies. Then Rachel suddenly stopped. Wait. She pointed toward two signatures. They're different. Everyone leaned closer. The contracts supposedly signed by Leonard Cross used two different handwriting styles. Detective Harris narrowed his eyes. One is forged. Adrian slowly looked toward Victor's diary. If Leonard didn't sign every contract, someone signed them for him. Claire whispered. Who? The room fell silent. Then Margaret quietly answered. I know exactly who had authority to do that. She looked directly at Adrian. It wasn't Victor. Everyone stared. If not Victor, then who? Margaret took a slow breath. The company's legal advisor. A man everyone trusted. A man who retired the same year the fraud began. Adrian's heartbeat quickened. He remembered the name instantly. Not because of business. Because that retired lawyer had personally certified the documents after the factory collapse in Adrian's first life. The man everyone believed had left years earlier had never truly left the game. He had simply disappeared into the shadows while Victor became the visible face of the scandal. For the first time, Adrian realized something terrifying. Victor wasn't the mastermind. He was only one piece of a much larger betrayal. The workshop was silent. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. Every document spread across the tables suddenly looked different. Until that moment, Victor Vale had been the center of every suspicion. Now, he looked more like a shield. Someone who had hidden the real architect for years. Detective Harris finally broke the silence. Name him. Margaret folded her hands. Harold Sloan. The name settled over the room. He served as Vale Heritage's legal advisor for 28 years. He drafted supplier contracts. He approved acquisitions. He created shell companies that looked perfectly legitimate. Claire frowned. And then he retired. Margaret nodded. Officially. Rachel immediately opened her laptop. I'll see if he's really retired. Within seconds, she stopped typing. That's strange. What? There are no recent public records. No interviews. No board memberships. No tax filings. Adrian quietly finished her sentence. Just like Leonard Cross. Rachel looked up. They vanished the same way. Detective Harris's expression hardened. They didn't disappear. They went underground. The following morning, police teams raided the forgotten lumber mill. It was empty. Machines still hummed. Coffee sat untouched on a desk. The office safe stood open. Whoever had been inside had fled only hours earlier. Harris examined the abandoned paperwork. They were warned. Rachel looked toward Adrian. Someone leaked the investigation. Adrian nodded slowly. There are still people helping them. One officer walked over carrying a burned ledger. Most of it's destroyed. Adrian carefully turned the damaged pages. Only a few entries remained readable. One line caught his attention. Shipment 47, Harbor Warehouse. His heartbeat quickened. He remembered it. In his first life, the Harbor Warehouse had stored imported hardwood. Only later had it become a private auction building. If Harold Sloan needed somewhere to hide records, that warehouse would be perfect. Before sunset, Detective Harris obtained a warrant. The warehouse looked abandoned from the outside. Inside, it wasn't. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes filled with contracts. Financial ledgers. Supplier agreements. Original company seals. Rachel stared in disbelief. They kept everything. No, Adrian replied. They kept leverage. Harold Sloan hadn't saved evidence out of sentiment. He had saved it to control everyone involved. Every forged signature. Every illegal payment. Every accomplice. The files were insurance. And now, they belonged to the investigators. Across the city, Victor sat alone in a cheap motel room. The television repeated the same breaking headline. Second search links fraud to wider network. His phone rang. He answered immediately. Harold. Instead, Detective Harris replied. No. Victor froze. We found the warehouse. Silence. Then Harris added. You should stop running. Victor slowly lowered the phone. For the first time in decades, he understood. The game was over. He surrendered before midnight. No dramatic chase. No shootout. Just a tired man walking into a police station carrying a small suitcase. Reporters surrounded him. He said nothing. Not a single word. Harold Sloan proved harder to find. For 3 days, he vanished completely. Then Rachel received an anonymous email. No message, only a location. An old lakeside cabin. Police surrounded the property before dawn. Inside, Harold calmly sat beside a fireplace reading a book. He didn't resist. As officers escorted him outside, he glanced once toward Detective Harris. You'll never prove intent. Harris smiled slightly. We don't need to. We found your records. For the first time, Harold Sloane's calm expression cracked. Months later, the trial began. Evidence filled the courtroom. Victor's diary, the hidden journals, the counterfeit supplier records, Rachel's photographs from the lumber mill, the restored contracts recovered from Harbor Warehouse. One witness after another testified. Margaret, Samuel Pierce, Claire Bennett, Damien. Finally, Adrian. He spoke simply. Not about rebirth. Not about revenge. Only about craftsmanship. About honest materials. About responsibility. The courtroom listened in complete silence. When he finished, the judge thanked him personally. Several weeks later, the verdicts were announced. Harold Sloane was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and corporate corruption. Leonard Cross received a lengthy prison sentence after accepting a plea agreement and revealing additional financial records. Victor Vale was convicted for his role in concealing the fraud and participating in illegal financial schemes. Justice arrived quietly, exactly as Adrian had hoped. Not through anger, through truth. Spring returned to Greybridge. The Kingsbridge Theatre reopened beneath bright lights and cheering crowds. Its restored balconies gleamed exactly as they had more than a century earlier. Claire stood beside Adrian during the opening ceremony. You saved this place. Adrian smiled. No, everyone who refused shortcuts did. She laughed. You really never take all the credit. Someone taught me patience. He glanced toward Lionel. The old craftsman pretended not to notice. Vale Heritage survived. Barely. The board unanimously elected a new chairperson. Margaret. Not because she belonged to the family. Because she had protected the company's integrity when others remained silent. The business returned to its roots. Quality before expansion. Craft before profit. Elias personally supported the decision. I spent too many years believing blood mattered more than character. I won't make that mistake again. Damien never sought the chairmanship. Instead, he appeared one afternoon at Adrian's workshop wearing simple work clothes. I brought an application. Adrian looked confused. For what? Damien smiled awkwardly. I heard you're hiring. Lionel nearly dropped his hammer. You? Damien shrugged. I know nothing about woodworking. Lionel grinned. I noticed. Everyone laughed. Even Adrian. For the first time in either lifetime, they weren't rivals. They were simply two men trying to become better than they had been yesterday. Elias visited the workshop one final time before retiring completely. He watched apprentices carefully shaping walnut cabinets. The room echoed with saws, laughter, and quiet conversation. No executives. No shareholders. No arguments over quarterly profits. Only honest work. He turned toward Adrian. I wanted to leave you a company. He paused. I'm glad you refused. Adrian looked around the workshop. So am I. The old man smiled. I finally understand your decision. You didn't reject our family. You rejected our mistakes. Adrian nodded. Someone had to. Months later, Rachel published the story she had spent nearly a year investigating. Not a sensational headline. Not a scandal-filled expose. Its title surprised everyone. The Cost of Cheap Wood. The article wasn't really about timber. It was about choices. About how tiny, dishonest decisions, repeated year after year, could destroy businesses, families, and lives. It won national awards. Rachel celebrated by bringing the framed newspaper to the workshop. It belongs here. Adrian shook his head. It belongs wherever people remember why honesty matters. One quiet evening, after everyone had gone home, Adrian unlocked the small cabinet beneath his desk. Inside lay a fresh notebook. Unlike the stolen one, this notebook contained no warnings. No lists of future disasters. No names of people who would betray him. Only sketches. Furniture designs. Ideas from his apprentices. Notes from Lionel. A few pressed flowers that children had left with restored heirlooms. He smiled as he closed it. His second life was no longer about escaping the past. It was about creating a future worth remembering. Outside, the restored music box melody drifted softly through the workshop. Adrian walked to the window. The city lights reflected across the glass. In his first life, He had accepted the family business because he believed duty meant sacrificing himself. In his second life, he finally understood the truth. Sometimes the bravest act isn't taking the throne everyone expects you to claim. Sometimes it's walking away before someone else's betrayal becomes your destiny. That was why, when given a second life, he refused the family business. And by refusing it, he finally inherited something far greater than a company. A life that was truly his own.